Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to welcome you to our KeyBank speaker series today, where we have the distinct honor to welcome Congressman Mondaire Jones. I'm so excited to see you here, Congressman. I know John will formally introduce you, but we met months ago outside in a socially distanced lunch, and it was a pleasure to meet you and to hear your vision, your ideas, and now to see you actually putting those ideas and thoughts and visions into motion. So thank you. So thank you so very much. We have a wonderful relationship with KeyBank. This is the KeyBank speaker series, and it is my honor to introduce John Mondaire, the president of the Hudson Valley Metro New York market and the Northeast Regional Executive for KeyBank. John?
Thank you, Marcia. As Marcia said, I'm John Mondaire, market president to KeyBank's Hudson Valley and Metro New York markets. Those of you who joined us last week for the first part of this excellent program heard me mention that while I only assumed the market leadership position in November, I've been with Key for more than 20 years, leading its real estate capital business in the Northeast. I've also worked closely with Joe Markey, my colleague, who represents Key on the Business Boards Council and Board. So I'm very familiar with Key's longtime partnership with the Business Council of Westchester and the valuable support it provides to the Westchester business community. KeyBank has been sponsoring this speaker series for many years because supporting local businesses is key to our business and the economic health and well-being of our community. It is important that businesses and our legislators work in tandem, and these conversations help drive that collaboration. Last week, we enjoyed a very engaging discussion with the United States Congressman Jamal Bowman of the 16th Congressional District. And today we are fortunate and lucky to continue that discussion with Congressman Mondaire Jones. We're so proud of him and congratulate him very much. I want to thank Marcia and her team for making these conversations a focus and allowing KeyBank the opportunity to support them. With that, I will turn things back to Marcia, and thank you very much and congratulations again, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, John. You know, we all know that at no time has it been more important to have an excellent relationship with your bank and your community bank. PPP loans are available again, and there are other grants and dollars out there. KeyBank has been so well suited to help businesses and especially the small business community. So John and the entire KeyBank team, thank you so much. And by the way, KeyBank is also a key sponsor and a speaker tomorrow at our conference, Driving Diversity and Inclusion: Perspectives, Practices, and Opportunities. That begins tomorrow at 8:30. We are so proud to welcome Alfonso David, who is the chairman, who is the CEO and president of the Human Rights Campaign. Please join us tomorrow at 8:30 until noon. There is a schedule where we have a robust agenda, which is going to give corporations and organizations new perspectives on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I want to also recognize our chairman, Heidi Davidson from Galvanize Worldwide, and the vice chair of our board for governmental affairs, George Lenz from Nicholas & Lenz. And with that, I'm going to turn this program over to my colleague, John Ravitz, our executive vice president and chief operating officer. John.
Thank you, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. And for those who still have not yet registered for tomorrow's diversity conference, please go to our website to do so as well. As Marcia said, it should be an exciting day. As the county's largest business membership organization focusing on economic development and advocacy, we have prided ourselves on our commitment to our members and the business community to be the eyes, the ears, and sometimes the voice for our members to our elected officials on all levels of government. And we do that in a myriad of ways through our Government Action Council that is led by George Lenz, to our advocacy programs that are led by our members, as well as Andra Horsch, our Vice President for State Government Affairs, our associate in Albany, John Boltz. We try again to be a daily presence to our members by giving them the opportunity to interface with their elected officials. And we are thrilled today to be able to continue that promise by bringing to you Congressman Mondaire Jones. It's very rare where a county like Westchester County not only has one, but two new members of Congress. And so to be able to begin to talk to them, to build a relationship, to build a strong line of communication, it is very important to do that. And so Congressman Jones, we know you're in Washington. We know it's a voting day. Hopefully that bell won't go off in the next 45 minutes, but we appreciate you being here. And let me just tell our folks, our audience a little bit more about you. Mondaire Jones is serving his first term as the congressman from the New York 17th District, encompassing all of Rockland County and parts of Central and Northern Westchester County. A product of East Ramapo Public Schools, the congressman was raised in Section 8 housing and on food stamps in the village of Spring Valley by a single mom who worked multiple jobs to provide for their family. After graduating from Stanford University, the congressman worked in the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Legal Policy, where he vetted candidates for federal judgeships and worked to reform our criminal legal system to make it more fair and equitable. He later graduated from Harvard Law School. Prior to running for Congress, the congressman worked as a litigator in a private practice where he was awarded the Legal Aid Society of New York for his pro bono service investigating claims of employment discrimination, and helping families defrauded during the Great Recession recover their funds. Subsequently, he served as a litigator in the Westchester County Law Department. The congressman began his activism in high school through the Spring Valley NAACP Youth Council. He would go on to serve on the NAACP's National Board of Directors. The congressman is a co-founder of the nonprofit Rising Leaders, Inc., which teaches professional skills to underserved middle school students in 3 American cities, and has previously served on the board of the New York Civil Liberties Union. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, the congressman continues his lifelong advocacy for civil rights and civil liberties and the strengthening of our democracy. In Congress, Mr. Jones is fighting for COVID-19 relief, a living wage for all, universal health care, racial justice, climate action, and restoration of the SALT deduction. The congressman serves as the freshman representative to leadership in the 117th Congress, making him the youngest member of the Democratic House leadership team. He also serves as deputy whip for the Congressional Progressive Caucus and as a co-chair of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus. The congressman was raised in Rockland County and resides in Westchester County. And last month, Westchester Magazine listed him as one of the 12 Black leaders changing Westchester. Congressman, thank you for being with us. I know it has been a first month and a few days of a lot of activity. I shared with Congressman Bowman my first month in the New York State Assembly. I got lost from my office to the chamber back to my hotel. So I can only imagine what you've had to go through to serve in those first few days, where you not only had to certify a presidential election, live through an insurrection of the United States Capitol, and then have to vote on impeachment, as well as deal with the pandemic issues that I know Congress is facing right now. So we're so grateful for you taking time out to be with us today. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. When you're done with your presentation, I'll come back on and we'll take some questions and answers from the audience. For those of you who would like to ask the congressman a question, please put that question in the chat room or the Q&A room so that we can try to get to them as many as possible. Congressman, again, thank you for joining the Business Council of Westchester, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, John, for that very generous introduction, and good morning to everyone. And of course, thanks also to Marcia for inviting me to speak with you all today. As a former corporate lawyer who served businesses across industries, I understand the important role that local businesses play in creating a strong middle class and giving local governments the revenue that they need to provide essential services, some of which we are missing right now. I last spoke with you as a candidate for Congress, and I'm honored to be back now as your representative. As you might imagine, last month, as you just heard, and as you've seen, I'm sure, on at least cable television, was not the introduction to Congress I was expecting. On January 6th, I was in the House chamber, on the House floor, seated with the Democratic leadership team, during what historically had been a routine election certification process. Then, after some commotion, there was an abrupt announcement by security personnel that the Capitol had been breached by the mob outside, and that we would need to lock the doors to the House chamber from the inside. Minutes later, there was a very loud banging sound at one of the doors behind me from that mob of domestic terrorists that you all saw on TV. And we were told to look under our seats and to withdraw gas masks in case tear gas needed to be used. I've never used a gas mask before. We were also told to prepare to lie down on the ground in the event of gunfire. My life literally flashed before my eyes. Thankfully, with moments to spare, we were evacuated through tunnels to a more secure location where, unfortunately, a number of my colleagues got COVID because the usual suspects in Congress refused to wear their masks. I have said before that most people would quit their jobs if on day 4 they almost died while at work. But for me, the events of January 6th have only strengthened my resolve to have a government that works for the people and that delivers for my constituents in Westchester and in Rockland counties. As you heard, right now, my top priority is COVID-19 relief. No surprise there. We must crush the virus, deliver relief for working people and small businesses, and fully reopen our economy, the greatest economy. Just last night, I voted to pass a budget resolution that will fast track President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID bill and finally deliver real relief to the American people. This is a bill that will put money back into the pockets of working people, aid small businesses, and lift us out of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. In our area alone, the pandemic has wiped out over 60,000 jobs. Westchester needs the bold, immediate relief that President Biden's plan provides. President Biden's American Rescue Plan reflects the reality that we can't recover from the economic downturn without recovering from the pandemic that caused it. To respond to the pandemic, the plan devotes $160 billion in direct COVID relief. That's everything from vaccinations and testing to enhancing health services for people of color, low-income folks, and other communities the pandemic has ravaged the hardest. To help restore our economy, the bill invests $50 billion in supporting small businesses. And to alleviate the burden these twin crises have imposed on our families, the bill includes over $100 billion for safely reopening our public schools and $20 billion to childcare providers. Of course, the bill also provides $1,400 survival checks to the Americans who need them most. The next and most immediate priority has to be fixing our broken democracy. I say this now as a member of the House Judiciary Committee. The insurrection that I lived through on January 6th started with the myth of voter fraud, which the GOP is using, by the way, to lay the foundation for another decade of suppressing the votes of people of color, working people, and young people. To fix our democracy for the future, we must pass a piece of legislation called the For the People Act, also known as HR 1. The bill would end partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts so that QAnon adherents and other crazy people don't coast to victory in their general election contests after prevailing in their primaries. It would establish small dollar public financing for congressional campaigns, and it would enact automatic voter registration to enfranchise an additional 50 million people nationally. Together, these reforms will help ensure that the movement the insurrection represented, that anti-democratic movement, can never again threaten our democracy. Now, an issue that I know is near and dear to us in Westchester and Rockland as well is the state and local tax deduction, also known as the SALT deduction, which Donald Trump capped at $10,000 in December of 2017. Nearly half of all households in New York's 17th congressional district saw their tax bills go up. Nearly half. Hundreds of thousands of people in our district, where we pay the highest property taxes in the entire nation, had to pay thousands of dollars more in taxes each year. That's why last week I, along with Congressman Tom Suozzi of Long Island and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, introduced the SALT Deductibility Act, bipartisan legislation that would fully restore the SALT deduction and put thousands of dollars back into the pockets of hundreds of thousands of people here in Westchester and in Rockland counties, especially during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. According to the New York State Division of the Budget, by repealing the deduction cap of $10,000, our legislation will restore over 45,000 jobs to the New York City metro area. Most recently, as in this week, I also introduced the Apprenticeship Access for All Act alongside Congresswoman Alma Adams. This is legislation that will help ensure that all Americans have equitable access to the national apprenticeship system, an essential pathway to good paying jobs in the workforce of the future. People of color and individuals with disabilities have been among those the pandemic has hit the hardest. They've also historically faced barriers to equitable participation in our economy. Our bill is a vital step towards addressing these inequities. So again, thank you for all taking the time to hear about my first month in Congress and what I'm hoping to accomplish in my first term. I am honored to represent you. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And again, we appreciate you being here today, a voting day in the Capitol. Let's talk a little bit about the president's American Rescue Plan and the $1.9 trillion attached to that, because it has such huge ramifications for New York State. As you know, last month, Governor Cuomo introduced his budget. And for those of us who have been around Albany for many years, it was really the first time that we heard a budget presentation where the governor had to lay out two different scenarios. Scenario one was if the bill passes in Washington, the state would get $15 billion, which would basically wipe out the state's $15 billion deficit, and work could get done on other programs because of that. Scenario two was what happens if New York only gets $6 billion. And that's where cuts would have to be seen on local governments as well. So what I wanted to ask you, and I think it's very exciting that you are now the freshman representative to the leadership, because you're going to be in the room as you discuss this. What is the New York delegation thinking in terms of the governor's request? What are you fighting for? And what do you see the possibility of getting this bill passed and getting the $15 billion for New York State?
Well, thankfully, I will be in the room, even if it is a virtual room. Look, this is something that the New York delegation uniformly cares very deeply about. It was the case a few months ago that number was closer to 13 billion or 14 billion. And so every day that Congress tarries, that Congress delays necessary real relief for states like New York, who have really borne the brunt of this crisis, even as, by the way, we send so much more tax revenue to Washington than we get back in return in terms of services. Then those are days that we cannot get back, and those are lives that are being impacted. I had the opportunity to visit the Ossining Children's Center about a month or so ago, and we don't talk enough about the high cost of childcare in our community, and how parents are really struggling with that, and the economic devastation that is causing, and sort of crazy decisions that are being made with respect to that. Our nonprofits are really struggling. Obviously, New York State has historically played a role in helping both local governments and nonprofits. And so all of this is really dire stuff. I am optimistic that we will pass this legislation. Senator Manchin has said that he is supportive of this legislation. The committees are now, the committees of jurisdiction throughout the Congress are now deliberating about the various pieces of legislation that will be included in the final budget that is passed. Just as a procedural matter, last night's vote was to outline what the budget would look like, sort of the different amounts of money in various buckets. And now, as a member of the Education and Labor Committee, for example, my committee is chaired by Bobby Scott, is looking at all of the great legislation that we wanted to see passed in the prior Congress that we couldn't get passed because of what was happening in the Senate, and what the priority pieces would be in the education and labor space, given the amount of money that has been allocated in that budget resolution that was passed last night. I think that people understand. I think you'll also potentially get some House Republicans to vote for this bill, but that remains to be seen in this very polarized environment. But I think what is bipartisan is the American people's support of this legislation, and that crosses the ideological spectrum. People want these $1,400 survival checks. They want their states to be able to provide essential government services, which they are really struggling to do given the budget shortfalls that, like the ones you just described at the New York State level.
You know, I'm curious because we know that in the Senate, and President Biden had a meeting with 10 Republican senators on Monday to discuss their compromise bill, which obviously is less money, but also didn't have anything for local and state government aid. So when you talk to your colleagues from all over the country, are you hearing people say, you know what, we don't need aid. We don't need aid to states and local governments, that we haven't been affected by this pandemic over the last year and our economies don't need the support from Washington? I'm just a little confused where the disconnect is.
Well, the disconnect is that there are a lot of people on the other side who simply don't want to pass any bill. They feel like what we have passed as a Congress previously is sufficient. And so that is how people get to a place where, despite the budget shortfalls like the one you just described, are not pressing matters for people. And so it's hard to really even engage in those kind of conversations where people are not approaching this in good faith. But the people I've spoken with personally, House Democrats uniformly understand the need to provide relief to our states. I am extremely passionate about making sure that New York gets the relief that it deserves. Again, we have borne the brunt of this crisis. We have seen the SALT deductibility capped at $10,000. I mean, we have just really been in the crosshairs of the prior administration's really destructive activity because he has something out against a blue state. So I view this as an opportunity for us to finally get some economic justice here. And also this is critical to reopening our economy, which both Democrats and Republicans say they want to happen. And that means we have to crush the virus. We have to provide immediate relief for nonprofits, governments, and indeed working people who need that relief, and that's what we're fighting for. Let me also add, in case this has not come up, we are also in the thick of an immigration discussion, not just because of the constituent work that many of you may be familiar with in my district, but also this is something that obviously matters to businesses. The comprehensive immigration reform that would put 11 million undocumented people, upstanding members of our national community and local communities, on a pathway to citizenship, an 8-year pathway to citizenship. I'm so supportive of overhauling our immigration laws to make them humane. And I know that organizations like the Chamber of Commerce have come out in support of that. And so this too, and I may be 33 years old, but I'm still old enough to remember George W. Bush proposing comprehensive immigration reform. So historically, that has enjoyed bipartisan support.
And Congressman, and you'll get our 2021 legislative agenda in the next few weeks, but under Marcia's leadership, we have always been very strong in the fact that if we're going to talk about immigration reform, we have to take the politics out of it, and again remind people of the fact that we're talking about human lives and people who are contributing not only to our workforce but to our society in so many important ways. So we share that with you as well. I just want to stick with Washington and the makings of Congress and your role now, because we do have a question about partisanship. And obviously, there's so much that has happened in the last few years and certainly in the last few weeks in Washington. But how do we lower the temperature? How do we begin to have members talking to each other from different parts of the country, but all because they were elected to serve their constituents, to help their country and get things done, especially after a year that we've had with this pandemic? What are some of the things and the skill sets that you're bringing to the job that might be able to achieve that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I don't think anyone in my situation should be expected to change the hearts and minds of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, who the former of which received a standing ovation from half of the Republican caucus yesterday. So I would push back on the framing of the question as though it is the responsibility of Democrats who want to deliver relief for the American people to lower the temperature. Having said that, I have worked with Andrew Garbarino, my colleague of Long Island, who has also co-sponsored the SALT Deductibility Act. And so there remains opportunity to work with people of good conscience in the United States Congress, including in the United States Senate. Now, most senators, in fact, even on the Republican side, did not object to the certification of the presidential election. Here's the explanation for that. When you are a United States Senator, you have to run statewide. Your electorate is more moderate. But because of partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts in this country, as I alluded to earlier, you can prevail in a primary as a QAnon conspiracy theorist in a Republican primary and coast to victory. And you bring that violent ideology to the United States Congress. And if there are enough of you, or if you have enough of a following, your minority leader, in this case, is kind of forced into submission if he wants to keep his job within the caucus, or if he himself wants to avoid a potentially dangerous primary challenge next year in 2022. We must end partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts and replace the drawing of congressional districts with independent redistricting commissions. We will get better people, sane people elected to Congress, people who are genuinely committed to doing the work of the American people, including helping the businesses represented on the Zoom today. The For the People Act, in addition to doing that, would also, through automatic voter registration, expand the franchise to people who, if you just listen to them, are clamoring for the kind of relief that the president has proposed in this COVID-19 bill. Again, overwhelmingly, the American people support this. Various provisions of the American Rescue Plan. But you would never know that based on the obstruction that you see an entire caucus engaging in right now in the United States Congress. And then, of course, public financing of congressional elections so that people who are more representative of our society are able to get elected to Congress. And again, are the kinds of people in Congress who are committed to delivering economic relief, who believe in science and allow science to drive their actions, who wear masks around their colleagues, who believe that other people wearing masks would help to crush the virus as we concurrently provide more vaccines and testing. It is extraordinary stuff what is happening in the United States Congress. The responsibility to lower the temperature right now falls on Kevin McCarthy and his caucus. Thank you.
Congressman, Our board of directors had a board meeting in January, and under the leadership of our board chair, Heidi Davidson, we broke it up into a working session to talk about priorities that obviously the country's facing and Westchester's business community is facing. And obviously, we've seen due to the pandemic, so many people now who have lost their jobs, who are now characterized as displaced workers. Sectors like the hospitality sector and the retail sector have been severely damaged. What are some of your thoughts? And I know you have some legislation that, as you briefly touched on, that we can do to get those folks retrained, hopefully back into positions that they were before, or if they have to go to a different sector to do that. But obviously workforce development is going to be and has to be a priority for everyone concerned.
I so appreciate that question. And we have to take a multi-pronged approach to that, right? So on one hand, there's the Apprenticeship Act that I just described, which would make available this national apprenticeship system and the opportunities therein to people and communities who have been hardest hit by the crisis, who will have the most difficulty, the greatest difficulty recovering from this. In the meantime, of course, we'll be extending supplemental unemployment insurance and generally the unemployment insurance program, separate and apart from the supplement. But we have to be thinking about jobs creation. And it is why I'm a big proponent of a national infrastructure bill. Again, something that historically has enjoyed bipartisan support, but that did not pass in the 116th Congress because there was a president and a majority leader in the Senate who was not committed to that. I view this as an opportunity to create green jobs so that we can save the planet from imminent climate catastrophe. Even as we employ thousands of people in Westchester and in Rockland counties. These are investments in rail, light rail, and if I had my way, high-speed rail. We know that the transportation sector is the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions globally. And in Rockland County, for those of you who don't know, in most parts of Rockland County, you don't have train access. And of course, we used to have light rail in places like Peekskill and Ossining. In Peekskill, most people work in Westchester County. The Metro North doesn't do much for you in that case. So we need to do light rail. We need to also expand bus access. And I would like an electric fleet. Obviously, that is the most environmentally friendly means of public transportation in that mode. And we also have to be thinking about investments in green technology and employing people in the jobs of the future and obtaining competitive advantages in that way. Because not all, in fact, most countries are still not investing in green technology. So here's a real opportunity for us. It's also necessary.
Let me just stick to energy and green for just a second. As you know, and I think we talked about this in our earlier meetings, one of the Business Council of Westchester's long-term and really legislative priorities is to continue to raise the concerns that we should all be fearing about with the fact that Indian Point is closing, their last reactor in April. We have always supported renewable energy as the new source of energy for this country. The concern we have and the conversations we've had with stakeholders on the state and federal level is, are we going to be ready? Do we have enough of the renewable infrastructure in place so that we don't have a reliability issue, that we don't see an increase in electric rates? And here's the concern, Congressman, where I'd love to get your thoughts. We need to build a renewable infrastructure. We need to be able to have solar farms. We need to be able to not have communities block turbine projects that are happening around the state. What can you do to help communities understand that we can't think about NIMBYism? We can't use environmental and impact studies and SECRA as an agent of delay. And are you concerned that come April 30th, when that last reactor is closed at Indian Point, that our region has enough power to move forward?
I think we will have enough power, but I am concerned long-term about the NIMBYism that you described. And that will be combated successfully by people in leadership like myself, like you, across industries, explaining to people that environmental legislation is not job killing or somehow anti-economy, but rather an opportunity and in fact, a necessity to ensure a livable future, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children. There has to be a push from a PR standpoint so that people are not afraid of changing habits, that people understand that these are opportunities to grow the economy. And I wish people would listen to their children more, frankly, on this, because young people get it, man. I mean, it's like the single, I guess, I know Chuck Schumer did a poll on this. It was last year, it was like racial justice was number one, but number two, of course, was the economy, as it historically has been with young people, and was the environment, as it historically has been with young people. And so we have to do these investments legislatively. I think it starts with that infrastructure bill that I just described, which from the chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Mr. DeFazio, to the new Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, to the President of the United States, who has proposed the most ambitious climate agenda of any President of the United States in American history. We all understand that this infrastructure bill is a climate bill.
Well, we appreciate that. And again, we will look forward to working with you as we go into communities and really raise their awareness of why we need to get this renewable infrastructure in place. And it's for the future and it's for our kids' future. So you have our support on that. Also, for those of you who are on our program today, please know that our State of Economy series starts this month, and our first one is going to be on infrastructure. Because we have always made infrastructure funding a priority for us at the Business Council of Westchester as one of our key legislative priorities. So for those of you who would like to tune into that, please go to our website to register. Let me take some other questions, Congressman, before we let you go. Westchester and Rockland are home to many institutions of higher ed, with education. With respect to yours being on the Committee on Education and Labor, can you please talk about your priorities as they pertain to colleges and universities?
Well,
both profit and nonprofit, please.
In approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes, I will be on the Senate side of the Capitol at a press conference with Majority Leader Schumer, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Alma Adams, talking about the need to cancel student debt, which has crippled an entire generation of people. In Westchester and in Rockland County, thousands of young people have to live at home with their parents or their grandparents because they can't afford to live out on their own independently due to just crushing student debt. And when people compare their own experiences to this, they really miss the fact that wages have remained stagnant over the past several decades when you adjust for inflation, as the cost of attending a four-year institution has skyrocketed. In 1990, the average debt for someone graduating a four-year institution was about $9,000. And in 2017, it was like $37,000. As wages have been stagnant during that same period, this is an issue of, well, frankly, this is existential. I mean, you want to be a community where young people want to move to and start families, right? Because if they don't want to do that, there are all kinds of implications, including financial ones for local governments who are relying on a tax base. But also, you want to have an economy where people feel empowered to be entrepreneurial, where people want to take risks, which has been historically how we've gotten some of the greatest achievements in our economy, in the American economy. And so, and then of course the leading economists say that this will create jobs, that this will be a net gain economically and in terms of revenue for our country, to free people up by mitigating this crippling student debt that people are experiencing. But I think long-term and concurrently, I and others are pushing for tuition-free public colleges and universities so that people don't have to make crazy decisions about taking on crippling student debt or getting what is necessary for the vast majority of good paying jobs in our economy, that being a four-year education and higher education. So I'm really looking forward to serving on the Higher Education Subcommittee as a member of the Education and Labor Committee. I know in the interim that as we negotiate this COVID-19 relief bill, that institutions of higher ed are also going to be recipients, if we get what we want, of aid to safely reopen, as well as the public schools that I described earlier from K through 12.
Well, and again, we're very proud at the BCW that we have all of the colleges, public and private, as members, and we look forward to introducing you to those that you haven't yet met, and hopefully in the near future be able to walk the campuses and talk to the students and faculty as well. We've gotten a few questions about the cost of adult care, and the questions all seem to talk about asking your thoughts on a subject where, unlike childcare, caring for adult loved ones can last decades and often bankrupt families. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you see some relief that Washington is looking at to deal with this issue?
Well, it should not be haphazard relief. And I'm not sure that all of your members will agree with me, but it's why I support a single payer Medicare for all system, which would provide long-term care to everyone as a right. But in the meantime, we've got to be making sure that we are providing as a federal government resources to people who are really dealing with that. I think it is expanding, Medicare to cover that. I'll just tell you from my personal experience. My grandmother had to be in a nursing home recently, and one of the conversations was, well, what if she needed to be in a facility sort of long term, and just sort of fighting with the requirements for that in order for it to be covered by Medicare was a really eye-opening experience. And so, this is something that is untenable, I think, long term. I get it. I feel it. I have personal experience with it. It's why I'm fighting for Medicare for all. But in the meantime, we can at least be expanding coverage to include long-term care with some of the national healthcare programs that we offer.
Congressman, I got one last question for you, because I think it's important. You were recently quoted in the Journal News talking about that you want to be a mentor to a new generation of young leaders who won't defer to committees to, quote, anoint them or authorize them to run for office. And you stated, this is how democracy ought to work in a free and civilized society. Can you just share with us a little bit about, obviously you're in your first month and plus day 2 or 3 of office, but when you talk about a new generation of leaders, what does that look like to you?
I think the new generation, well, let me just provide context for that quote for people who may not be familiar. For most of my 1.5 year long campaign, journalists and political insiders, including members of the local Democratic committees, described my victory as improbable, to be kind. And I never thought that. And I'm grateful to have been in conversation with everyday working people throughout the course of that campaign, and to have been vindicated by the electorate. And I think we need to be creating opportunities for people who come from diverse backgrounds, who are representative of as Speaker Pelosi says, the beautiful diversity of this country. You wouldn't know it if you just took a look at Congress. And I'm one of just a few millennials in the Congress. Despite the fact that millennials increase their share of the electorate and Generation Z as well, and helped to elect this president, in fact, just a few months ago. And I got to tell you, conversations about student debt, climate, in any number of issues that are, big tech, because we actually use these apps, are easier to have. And I think there is more urgency from people in my generation. And so I want to make sure that I'm using my platform to mentor people and to provide opportunities to folks who would bring what I think is a much needed perspective in the United States Congress, because it has direct implications for our policies. How can you
Well,
expect
Congressman,
people to regulate, Facebook and Amazon and the monopoly power that they have in our economy? Folks don't even know how to use these platforms.
well, Congressman, your office just let us know that you do have a vote in the next few minutes. So we do want to get you on your way. Look, we appreciate you spending time with us today. More importantly, we appreciate the fact that I think, already have developed a relationship where we have a good line of communication with you. We're going to continue to make sure that we introduce you to our members, which cover all the gamuts in both the public and private sector. So you can really hear from the folks who are living and breathing the American dream on a daily basis. I want to thank your staff. Sabir Mohammed, who's your Director of Operation, has been terrific. Again, even if we agree to disagree sometimes, the most important thing is that we will work together on many, many issues. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Marcia to close out the program.
Great, and thank you, John Ravitz, who always does such a great job on behalf of the Business Council of Westchester of facilitating these conversations. And Congressman Jones, I will say, for just being here for a few short weeks, actually, look at what we covered in 45 minutes: tax structure, green jobs, energy, immigration, colleges, support for New York, healthcare, the Washington climate, economic development, infrastructure. That's an awful lot, and we are so proud to have had you today, to have introduced you to our members, and we look forward to a very strong relationship going forward between you and your team and the Business Council of Westchester and our members. We wish you all a great day. Once again, thank you to KeyBank and John Manganiello. Thank you everyone for attending. Stay safe, wear a mask, and we hope to see you tomorrow at our Diversity and Inclusion Conference. Have a good day. Thank you
so much. Take care, everyone.